What would you do if the people who promised to protect property values tried to bulldoze your past and your peace and then fined you for daring to say no? Imagine opening your front door to a woman with a clipboard and a smile that feels like a paper cut, telling you the home your granddad built is non-compliant with the community vision. My name's Rex Holloway. I live at the edge of a little Michigan lake where loons call at dusk and the pines still remember my grandfather's hands. He raised the cabin right after Korea hand-hewn cedar. A dock, he said, plank by plank. A fire ring that's seen more stories than any library I've ever been in. When life fell apart, divorce, empty weekends, too much silence, I moved back to the water, chasing quiet. I didn't come looking for a fight, but, man, the fight found me. Her name is Karen Whitfield, president of our HOA, midlife, neat as a pin. The sort of person who irons a t-shirt and writes minutes for a backyard barbecue. Karen patrols in a spotless crossover, a tape measure dangling from a retractable holster like she's in some suburban Wild West. She chases dandelions, measures flagpoles, and scolds wind chimes. You know the type. If power was a juice box, she'd squeeze it till the straw snapped. The very first morning she met me, she didn't say, "Welcome." She said, "Courtesy notice." Then she handed me a stack of forms, 47 violations. 47. My dock. Allegedly, 3 feet too long, 3 feet over the allowable aesthetic shoreline extension. My mailbox, color tone out of palette family. My fire pit, unpermitted combustion feature. Daily fines, $75. Administrative fee, $500. If not paid within 30 days, a lien may be recorded. She said lien like a promise. Slow and sugary. I told her the cabin was older than the HOA. Karen's smile didn't crack. Previous ownership is irrelevant, she said. All properties within our jurisdiction comply. That's the covenant. You signed it by virtue of acquisition. I hadn't signed a dang thing. Then, she added, flipping a page, we will ensure compliance on your behalf. That sounded a lot less like neighborly help and a lot more like a threat. I wish I could say I handled it calm as a monk. Truth. My hands shook. I could smell cedar and Old Spice from Grandpa's jacket hanging by the door. And something in me went stubborn. That night I drove to the county building, logged into a creaky computer, and started pulling deeds like a raccoon working a lid. The more I read, the more my eyebrows tried to climb off my face. The HOA filing happened months after Grandpa passed. The developer's son, now an HOA board member, somehow witnessed Grandpa's signature on a community consent form that, didn't exist during Grandpa's life. At least, that's how it looked to me in the records. Was it sloppy paperwork? Was it worse? I didn't know yet. But something smelled off, and not just the fishy canal down the road. I decided to prepare like the Army taught me plan. Evidence. Patience. I put up security cameras. High and legal. I started a Manila Mountain dates. Photos. Every letter with a certified stamp. And I talked to my neighbors. That's when the pattern showed itself, like footprints in fresh snow. Martha, who's lived here since forever, had to rip out the roses her late husband planted, because, quote, height uniformity is paramount. Tom, an Afghanistan vet, got fined for a flag that stood beyond proportional mast height. A young couple were ticketed because their twins drew chalk suns on the sidewalk, unauthorized surface art. It wasn't rules, it was control. And the targets were always the folks least likely to fight. When Karen realized I wasn't rolling over, she escalated. Early one morning, she arrived with a surveyor and a local handyman, trailing behind like nervous ducklings. They marched around my property, peering through windows with clipboards at the ready. The surveyor took photos of everything: dock cleats, a dented trash can, the little wooden sign that says, "Welcome," muddy boots. My cameras got all of it. Later, the handyman pulled me aside at the gas station and mumbled that Karen paid half up front and wanted him to find problems even if, you know, he had to. Invent them a little. He looked embarrassed, like a man who'd borrowed trouble and now had to pay it back with interest. Karen didn't just ticket. She talked. At the diner, over pie. She told whoever would listen that I was unstable, that I intimidated neighbors. That could crush a person's reputation in a small town. I kept my mouth shut and my binder open. Every gossip ripple went in the log, not as gospel but as context, with times spelled out, dates written longhand. I wasn't going to let rage write my case. Facts would. I hired a lawyer out of Grand Rapids, a woman named Stella who doesn't blink much and smiles only when the other side trips over its own shoelaces. Over coffee, she said. Michigan law is clear on pre-HOA properties. Also, if there's a pattern of fraud or harassment, there are statutes with teeth. She called me a private scout for the public good. I liked that. Made me feel less like a guy with a binder and more like a citizen doing his job. Meanwhile, Karen kept prowling. She sent daily compliance checks by email. She called my mortgage lender. Somehow, her brother-in-law works there and hinted that risk factors were increasing. She filed environmental complaints. Claimed my little dock shadow threatened aquatic life. One evening, around 9, I spotted her crouched behind my lilac bush, whisper scolding my porch light for being the wrong temperature. My daughter, Addison, called from college. "Dad, are you okay?" My ex worried I was spending tuition money on lawyers. I stared at the lake and promised both of them I had a plan. Truth, some nights I was scared. Some nights I woke to that old military alertness, the kind that listens for trouble breathing. Then, the money trail cracked. A neighbor who works in accounting looked over the HOA's annual reports. Line items were odd maintenance fees paid to a management company with no real address. The name Whitfield Community Partners. Karen's last name. Weird coincidence, maybe. But the amounts were high, tens of thousands. Neighbors mumbled about a son's failed restaurant, a sudden new patio at Karen's place, weekend casino runs. I didn't repeat rumors. I just wrote down filings, dates, and who said what. Then, Stella subpoenaed bank statements. I thought we were closing in. Then Karen did something unthinkable. It started with a smell. On a rainy night, a rank stench rose from the edge of my septic field, like a bait shop left in the sun. The next morning, a county inspector rolled up at dawn, a bandana over his nose. Claim already in hand. Anonymous complaint, he said. He prodded the ground. I watched from the porch, coffee in hand, face saying nothing. My cameras had caught the whole thing the night before. A person in pink garden gloves dumping a contractor bag near the drain field, then scurrying off. The figure's silhouette, how do I put this kindly, looked familiar. The inspector slit the bag. Out slithered fish bones, lemon wedges, greasy napkins from Paulie's Fish Fry. He rolled his eyes and apologized. Happens sometimes, he said. Neighborhood politics. I saved the footage to 3 different drives. Facts are boring, but they're bulletproof. Karen filed a civil suit against me soon after harassment. Defamation. Willful non-compliance. The amount, $12,000 in penalties. Plus, make whole attorney fees. We countersued harassment. Fraud. Formation irregularities. Interference with quiet enjoyment. Stella's filings read like a metronome cam. Careful beats. She didn't throw tantrums, she threw exhibits. At the next HOA meeting in the clubhouse, folding chairs squeaked, and neighbors sat stiff as church. Karen called the gathering to order with a wooden gavel she'd bought for herself. We must preserve our standards, she said. She read my alleged sins like charges at a medieval trial. When Stella asked to see the original community consent forms, Karen claimed they were archived off-site. Off-site where? In secure storage, she said. For everyone's protection. Uh-huh. Then, Dale the tire shop guy, who sometimes does odd jobs, blurted a sentence that landed like a brick. The signatures were, you know, added after the fact. The room went quiet enough to hear the exit sign hum. Karen's eyes widened. She tried to gavel the silence into submission. But the silence had learned to speak. That week, more stories surfaced. A widow made to cut down a memorial tree because the bark contrasted with the community palette. A retiree fined because his bird feeder allegedly attracted vermin, by which they meant squirrels. A single mom billed for a shed that came with the house. A shed older than the HOA itself. We thought it was just us, they said. We thought we were the only ones she picked on. I felt a heat in my chest, anger braided with responsibility. I started a group chat named Coffee Club. We met in kitchens and carports, and passed around banana bread and courage. The local news heard a rumor. A cameraphone crept up my drive. The reporter expected a story about a dangerous veteran terrorizing his HOA. That's what Karen had pitched. I invited them in, laid out the binder, played the footage. I didn't trash talk. I didn't need to. Facts, dates, names, policies printed from the HOA's own site. The piece that aired that night didn't crown me a hero, but it did pull the curtain. Neighbors across the county messaged us too. Some said their boards were great. Others whispered nightmare. What struck me wasn't the stories. It was the shame that people felt embarrassed for being bullied. Shame's a shield for bullies. Sunlight breaks it. Stella called. The Attorney General's office is curious. Curious. Not committed. But even curiosity can change gravity. They scheduled a sit-down at my cabin. I vacuumed sawdust and polished Grandpa's brass latches. I set a second coffee mug on the counter like a peace offering to the state. The morning of the meeting, rain moved across the lake in slow silver sheets. The AG, Miss Santos, brisk and warm, stood by my sink, reading documents, while a deputy took notes. That's when the door didn't knock. It blew open. Karen stormed in like a SWAT team of one, tape measure at the ready, shrilling about immediate compliance and documented nonconformities. She didn't see the badge at first. Ma'am, the AG said, calm as a surgeon. You're in a private residence without consent. Karen froze, eyes swinging to the seal on the portfolio. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish remembering oxygen. The deputy clicked a pen. We're going to step outside, he said. Right now. Karen tried to talk through it. There's an emergency, this light fixture. But the deputy kept the door open and waited. You could hear rain counting the seconds. I don't like watching people humiliate themselves. I don't. But I'd be lying if I said I felt sorry. She'd spent months turning people's lives into a maze of rules with teeth. Now the maze had an exit sign. We handed over flash drives and binders. The AG didn't promise anything. That's not how it works. But when she said, "We'll be in touch," it felt like the lake took a deep breath. The days that followed were a braid of normal and not. I still split kindling. Still mended a loose board on the dock. Still waved at the mail carrier. But I also testified in a fluorescent room where a digital recorder blinked red. I spoke slow, like I was reading trail signs. The deputy asked short questions that carried long weight. "How do you know? What did you see? What did you record?" I said. "Here's the exhibit. And please, see the date spelled out there." I wasn't righteous. I was, I guess, steady. Karen started to flail. She filed a police report claiming I'd threatened her with military skills. A patrolman came out. I watched the footage I offered, and then leaned against his cruiser with a sigh. "Keep documenting," he said, "and don't take the bait." Karen called one of my ex-wife's friends, spinning stories about me being unstable. She even tried to slide an envelope to the county inspector, who told her, "No, not today. And also, not any day." Then came the boundary bombshell. In a trunk under Grandpa's medals, wrapped in oilcloth, I found the original deed and survey from the early 1960s, signed longhand by a namesake surveyor whose descendants still live 2 roads over. The measurements stretched my line farther along the shore than the community map showed, far enough that the little rose garden behind Karen's gazebo sprouted on my side of history. I didn't strut. I asked a licensed surveyor, one with a clean record, to re-verify. He did. With markers and GPS, and the quiet precision of someone who trusts his tools more than his voice. We didn't announce it. Not yet. We let the truth sit in its chair and rest. Meanwhile, the group chat grew into a neighborhood organism. People who'd never liked each other, honestly. People who'd barely said hello in 10 years started watching one another's kids and dropping off casseroles when court dates landed like hail. Tom, the vet with the too tall flagpole, offered to sit on porches at night so older neighbors could sleep. Martha started bringing extra coffee to meetings, just in case someone new walked in and needed a cup and a nod. Human beings are stubborn. Bullies bank on that, on our tendency to tough it out alone. But stubborn can learn to share. Stella assembled a timeline that read like a rail yard junction map, where each track led, where the paperwork slipped its switch, where the money left the station and never returned. She didn't accuse, she illustrated. When the subpoenas landed, the HOA board lawyered up. 2 members resigned. One sent an email titled, "I didn't know," which might have been true. But still, not knowing while being in charge is a kind of knowing you know. On a Wednesday in late spring, Miss Santos called to say she'd like to drop by again. She didn't drop by. She arrived with 2 investigators and a patience that could outweigh Mountain Stone. They asked to walk the boundary. We walked it. They asked to see the footage from the night of the fish dump. I queued it up. They asked about the management company. Stella answered. Nobody raised a voice. The loudest thing in the room was the soft whir of the external drive. That night, I slept like an anchor. The next morning, sunlight hit the lake in white shards. I made pancakes for Addison, who'd driven home to see this through. "You don't have to be brave," she said, flipping a blueberry onto my plate. You only have to be honest. She's the one who taught me that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is not take revenge. Just tell the truth long enough for it to stick. A week later, we gathered in the clubhouse for what Karen called an emergency standard session. She'd packed the agenda with my name. Lighting temperature variance. Dock. Extension encroachment. Mailbox pallet. Neighbors shifted in their chairs. Eyes slid toward me. I kept my hat in my hands, and my mouth closed. When Karen neared the final item, recommendation to place lien, Stella stood. Before any vote, she said, "Please view Exhibit A." She tapped a small projector. Up flashed the original deed, Grandpa's signature. The old surveyor's seal. A line that cut across the screen and, well, right through the HOA's community garden. Karen sputtered. Irrelevant. Outdated. Superseded. Stella clicked to Exhibit B, the resurvey with current methods. Stamped and registered. Exhibit C, the county's acceptance. Exhibit D, the HOA map with markers wrong by a distance measured in yards, not inches. People turned toward Karen. The silence grew hands and tugged at her sleeve. I wish the next part was polite. It wasn't. Karen grabbed the gavel and tried to rule the evidence out of order. That's not a thing. She said the projector was unauthorized equipment. She threatened to call the police. Stella nodded. Please do, she said. We'll show them the paperwork. A board member, one of the quieter ones, stood and said, We need to recess. Karen banged the gavel so hard the handle cracked. By dusk, word spread that the AG's office had executed a search warrant. Nobody marched. No torches. Just porch lights, burning a little later than usual. And the sense that a long hallway finally had an end. Charges came slow. Then all at once. Like the first raindrops before a summer downpour. The words were careful. Alleged this. Alleged that. I kept repeating it to myself. Alleged. Because the law isn't vengeance. It's the promise that harm gets named and measured. The news said sums missing from HOA reserves. Said a shell company received payments for services never rendered. They said a pattern of harassment toward less empowered residents. They said a lot of things I'd suspected, but never said out loud. Karen was arraigned in the morning. I didn't attend. I stacked wood and fixed a hinge and walked my property line with that new, old deed folded in my back pocket. I talked to Grandpa out loud. Which sounds a little odd, I guess. But it helped. We're okay, I told him. We're okay. Old man, a loon called back, like a yes. The board called a special meeting to vote on dissolution. Not every HOA is a tyrant. And not every board is a bully. But ours had become a machine that punished the very people it was meant to serve. A crowd filled the clubhouse. Not with pitchforks, but with lawn chairs and hope. The motion to dissolve passed. The room didn't cheer. Some cried. Martha squeezed my hand and said, Now I can replant Henry's roses. Tom unfolded a small flag from his pocket and smoothed the creases against his thigh. The twins from the chalk drawing incident showed up with rainbow-streaked palms and grins wide as lake water. When the dust settled, the county mediated a plan. Restitution for those fined unfairly. A neighborhood fund to repair what had been delayed. Culverts. A path light or two. A bench by the mail kiosk where folks could sit and talk. Which may be the best security system we ever install. Stella declined a victory speech. You all did this, she said. By telling the truth together. Karen's roses, turns out they grew on my slice of land, got repurposed. Martha led the charge to create a community pollinator bed near the shoreline. Butterflies, bees, milkweed, coneflowers. The ground that had hosted arguments began to host life again. I know that sounds sentimental, but stand there at golden hour and tell me it ain't true. Addison came home for a weekend. We sat on the dock, legs dangling, cups of coffee warming our hands. She asked if I'd ever move away. For the first time in a long time, I pictured a future without the constant hum of defense. I'll stay, I said, at least till the loon stops singing. She laughed and leaned her head on my shoulder. Now and then, the lake gives you a minute you want to live inside forever. We started something small that grew teeth, a veteran's weekend at the cabin. Tom runs the fishing. Martha handles food. Dale, the tire guy, who told the truth, even when his voice shook, donated a couple coolers. Yeah, a stack of those little camp chairs that fold like origami. We keep it simple stories. Coffee. Quiet. Some guys talk. Some don't. Either way, the water listens. People ask me if I won. Depends on what you mean. If you mean I kept a roof and saved a dock and tamed a bully, sure. But the real win was a neighborhood remembering it was a neighborhood. We traded suspicion for watchfulness, gossip for checking in, rules for rhythms. The lake didn't change, but the way the shore held us did. A month or two later, I ran into Karen at the grocery store. Aisle 6. Pasta and jarred sauce. She didn't look like a villain. She looked like a tired person with a heavy cart. I nodded. She nodded back. I didn't gloat. I didn't scold. Accountability belongs to the courts. Dignity belongs to everyone. Sometimes, on quiet mornings, I replay the first day she showed up clipboard. Smile. A stack of violations, thick as a phone book. I think about how small it would have felt to give in, to pay the fines, to repaint a mailbox, to shorten a dock, to let the world narrow to the shape of someone else's appetite for control. And then I look at the wildflowers behind the gazebo, mine by deed, ours by decision, and I know the better story. The better story isn't rage. It's resolve. It's neighbors folding chairs instead of folding in. It's, the awkward bravery of showing someone your binder. Of admitting you're scared. Of asking for help. It's the weird holiness of a group chat called Coffee Club that starts as logistics and ends as family. It's learning that if one person is getting trampled, sooner or later, we all limp. Grandpa used to say, take care of your edge of the lake, and the lake will take care of you. It sounded like folksy nonsense when I was a kid. Now it reads like a covenant. Stewardship is not the same as control. Standards are not the same as dignity. And power, unchecked, shrivels whatever it touches when the sun drops slow and the water turns to hammered copper. I sit on the dock and think about the chain of choices that brought us here. A bully chooses pressure. A neighbor chooses courage. A lawyer chooses patience. A reporter chooses curiosity. A state official chooses to listen. A community chooses to gather. And a lake ancient, indifferent, chooses to reflect whichever face we show it. So what would you do if your HOA knocked not with a welcome basket, but with a threat? Would you roll over? Or would you breathe, document, ask for help, and stand your ground? Has a clipboard ever tried to rewrite your life? Tell me down in the comments. Someone out there, maybe a Martha or a Tom or a tired single mom staring at a letter with the word lean in bold, needs to hear how you made it through. And hey, if you believe one stubborn voice can start a choir, if you believe communities are stronger than bullies, if you think a mailbox color should never matter more than a neighbor's dignity, yeah, stick around. Next time, I'll tell you about the small-town mayor who tried to shut down a veteran's food truck, and what happened when he picked the wrong soldier to mess with.